wise people, what are the 500 plants we need? Same in France, same in India. And so that's what the shamans are guardians of. And I love books, I live in a huge library, but we've lost something by losing contact with the actual, natural world, which, and the Druids obviously had that knowledge in the Celtic world. And some of our Druids do specialise in that still. They train as healers and know all the different, healing herbs and potions. I'm not one, I'm a philosopher Druid. But no, I love the shamans. Yes. And they were men and women both. So that's enough of that. I think any comments on that?
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you think it would be appropriate then to say that Druidry is a form of shamanism?
Yes, there are contemporary practicing Druids that regard that and say yes, 100%. And their style is quite shamanic. I have a shamanic side to my work, which I don't normally parade in public. And I've participated in shamanic, trainings and all that. Yes, and we know from the old Celtic legends that shape-shifting was part of what they did, and animals and trees and nature were their field for operation. I mean, Merlin, the name Merlin, is based on a bird, magical bird, and we were learning just the other day about owls and other magical birds. So this is very shamanic. It's not a completely lost tradition. This is what I was excited to discover when I lived in Wales and Scotland and travelled in Ireland. There are still people that know this stuff, and it's been handed down verbally since the beginning of time, or the beginning of humans inhabiting that part of the world. Yes, okay, any other questions about shamanism? Okay, let's move to the next one, which was
19. Bon.
Let's do the Central Asian one next. They are connected, of course. So number 35, which was Armel's, wasn't it? Well, strange enough, we had a visitor from the Turkish world a couple of weeks ago who really ought to be here to help answer this, because the Turks loved their Central Asian origin and their shamanic and primal tradition. Turkish as a language is a coded sound system that can convey some quite deep, profound thoughts. And under Kemal Ataturk, he was very interested in esoteric meaning of language and sound, and he was exploring whether Turkish language can convey certain sonic energies. Because the other thing about primal religions, including shamanism, is they do use the voice, and they use it for, we could call them spells, but actually it's shifts of energy using particular sounds to make like a punctuated point, and to call in the gods and the spirits. And the Turks traditionally did this. And what's really interesting is they've discovered some ancient runes. The oldest example of Turkish writing is actually in Central Asia, and it's engraved with Norse runes from the 6th century AD, but it's Turkish. So there's no explanation for this. Why are they using Norse runes? And my speculation is some Scandinavian wandering seers, experts in the runes, just happened to find themselves in Central Asia and taught the Turks how to use these runes. One seer to the other. If you can think of a better explanation, please let me know. They worship the sky god, Tengri. All these Central Asian pagans, or primal religions, their chief god is the sky. And that's very interesting, because the sky is pretty huge. And it's the source of all the weather, right? Rain, sun, all that stuff. And they regarded it as the supreme god. Tengri is not to mess with, because he brings omens and all the kind of events. And so he also can see everything we're doing. So Tengri is watching now, even though I've got a roof over my head, he can see through all that. And so I have to therefore act morally, because Tengri is looking down on us. God can see everything all the time, into the human heart and into every action we undertake. So there's no hiding from the sky, in fact. And the philosophy of Tengrism, as religious studies people call it, it's still alive and well in Central Asia now. It's had a revival with the fall of the communist system, dialectical materialism. When that left the stage in Mongolia, a lot of the Mongolians have gone back to Tengri worship. Now, interestingly enough, that was the religion of the primal Mongolian people, including Genghis Khan, who doesn't have a very good press, and some of the excesses that the Mongolians committed were pretty fearsome, and but intellectually, what Genghis Khan tried to do and the other Mongols was they convened conferences of interfaith leaders. So because their empire stretched all the way from China to the borders of France, I mean, think of it, right? And down into Persia and the Middle East. They knew about all the religions: Taoism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. And so they convened conferences of them all, but would sit there pretty unmoved, because the idea was, which religion should the empire convert to? And all these people said in turn. And at the end of the day, Genghis Khan just sat there and said, I think we'll stick with Tengri, because he is the sky over everything. And, so he was called the god of the Turks. He was the national god of the Gok Turks. And he was the chief deity of all these peoples in Central Asia, and still is, actually. So, yeah, although it's a primal religion, a pagan religion, it's still very much alive and kicking. I reckon it started at least, well, in the very earliest times of human beings there, and and their shamans are still active, and some interesting tales can be told. Some Christian missionaries kept trying to get to the Mongolian head office, so to speak, in Central Asia and convert them to Christianity, but they didn't succeed. And but the Mongolians are very polite. We love Christ. That's great. But from their perspective, he was just another son of God. God is Tengri, and so he can inspire different, wisdom teachers at different times when it's appropriate. There's a pyramidal-shaped mountain in the Tian Shan range between China and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, which is called Khan Tengri. So, they worship the mountains because they symbolize the god. And even in the ancestors of the Bulgarian people brought Tengri worship into Europe, because the Bulgarians were from Central Asia. And they have a mountain in Bulgaria called after Tengri. So, yeah, it's a subject of interesting current research in comparative religion at the moment. Okay, I'll stop there with that one. Any more questions about that, or is that?
How does he look like?
Well, he looks like the sky.
No face, never depicted on any wall or...
I don't believe so. But this is why the Tibetans, who we're about to turn to now, in their own way also worship the sky in the form of emptiness.
Okay.
So in the Bon religion, which we'll go to next, which is number 19, in a sense I argue, their native tradition, because the Tibetans and these Central Asians are sort of related people, right? Because they live high up in the mountains, the sky is the dominant thing. And so they know its seasons come and go. They have sky burials, so when a Tibetan dies, they put them on like a wooden thing, and then the birds come, take the flesh back into the sky. We all come from emptiness or sky, and we all go back to it, is the way of thinking. And so when Buddha teachings came to Tibet, the Bon people were already there. They were the spiritual shamans of primordial Tibetan culture, and they were already active in Tibet. And so when these Buddhists turned up and said, we've got an enlightened, tradition, we want you to become Buddhists, they said, okay, go on, explain. And when they did, the Bon said, well, that's funny, that's what we believe too, except we call it Tengri, or we call it, we have our own name for the ultimate principle. But there was a bit of magical battling going on, because shamans occasionally like to do magical battles. After all, they're human, right?
That's more fun.
Well, it's more fun.
Yeah.
It's like Star Wars, Sky Wars. But so
PC is not fun,
yeah.
in a way.
Hi.
So the great bringer of Tibetan Buddhism was called Padmasambhava, and Padmasambhava came to Tibet, bringing his tantric teachings, Vajrayana teachings, diamond path. He was trained in Bengal in the university in Nalanda, which was the haven of tantric Buddhism, which I've been to the ruins of it. It's amazing. And so he was asked by the king of Tibet to come and spread tantric Buddhism into Tibet. But the Bon people weren't that impressed. So there were magical battles whereby they had to see who could get up the top of the mountain first, because they could fly. Right. Now you can read that how you want. Out-of-body flying makes sense to me. Physical flying is something that only saints can do. I mean, there's a few Italian saints can levitate. So maybe these people are levitating up to the top of a mountain. I don't know. I suspend judgment. I think, personally, it's more the out-of-body journey they're doing. But the point is, there was a competition. And the trouble is they kept tying, because they were pretty much on the same level. And eventually they made a peace treaty, which is very important for interfaith peace work. So the Bon people said, that's fine, you can come, we'll accept your teachings of Buddhism, it's very similar to ours. But we want you to retain respect for our gods as well, and not to outlaw them or suppress them, not to persecute pagans, Bon people. And so the Bon tradition has always been accepted in Tibet, and the Dalai Lama sees himself as a protector of not just the different schools of Buddhism, but also the Bon people, Bonpos as they're called. And they have their own scriptures, which are very interesting. And scholars of religious studies have gone out and translated them. I used to have a library reader's ticket at SOAS, which has copies of the Bon texts. They're very similar to the Buddhist sutras of the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist kind. And they're pretty transcendental. They believe in the divine mind, the cosmic mind. The individual soul can learn to tune into that, can reach a state of illumination, which is our natural state. When we get there, it's like coming home. We think, thank God I'm back, because all the other stuff we do, anxiety, neurosis, revenge, hatred, grief, despair, that's all just nonsense that we learn to leave behind. And that's like getting back up to the top of the mountain. There are still Bonpos active, even though they were pretty much suppressed under the Chinese Cultural Revolution. They desecrated some of their monasteries. But they now live on in exile in Himalaya regions and elsewhere, and are doing teachings, So I think they should be honoured as a primal religion of Tibet. And I'm grateful for my Tibetan brothers and sisters there was a thing called Rimé in the 19th century of Tibetan Buddhism, whereby they agreed to have an ecumenical approach to knowledge. And I think it was a terrible mistake by Christianity to want to persecute and kill the pagans of Europe, for instance. I've always felt that was a loss. I've been researching the Lithuanian pagan traditions this last couple of weeks, and the Christians tried to absolutely destroy them and extirpate their temples and so on, but didn't succeed. They're still there. They've popped back up like mushrooms after the end of the Soviet Empire, and they're now freely able to practice their Lithuanian paganism in Lithuania with temples and priests and all that. But that's a fluke that they survived. And it's the same with the Druids, who were often suppressed, but they survived, and in Tibet they survived too. Yes, and so the let me just finish off with one last detail here. We know the names of some of their primal founders in the Bon tradition, and Shenrab, Tonpa Shenrab is one of their most important primordial founders, and we have the name Dranpa Namka, 8th century AD, and these people have left texts and teachings. The word Bon seems to, and it's a lot of scholarly dispute onto its origin, seems to mean who invokes, someone who invokes in Tibetan. So the Bon is someone that can invoke the gods or the spirits into a given place, situation or time. They use, so in a sense that's what shamans do, they invoke the gods. And there's a living oral tradition in it. We also have Shenrab's biography, and there's also, interesting, a sacred language associated with the Bon called Zanzun. I've never yet found a dictionary of Zanzun. I'd put it in my 99 Names of Peace book if I did. But we have Bon yoga manuals and treatises. And the most important thing is the peace treaty sworn with Padmasambhava. The Bon deities were enlisted to protect Buddhism as well. It works both ways. The Buddha Dharma protects the Bon, but the Bon gods were sworn to protect Buddhism. And so that's interesting. That's as if a Druid deity was allowed or encouraged to protect Christianity. I encourage this kind of divine interfaith commingling. I think the gods of each faith should make peace treaties with each other, and I think that's good. They believe in enlightenment deities, the Bon, and there are deities of compassion, and there are knowledge gods. Now, as the author of Being and Knowledge, of course, I'm very excited about this. I want to know who are the knowledge gods and where do they hang out. Apparently in the high Himalayas. There's the god of Mountain of Being. What a great name for a god. The god of the Mountain of Being. Yesmon Gyalpo, who is victorious over darkness. And these gods all have consorts because the Bon believe in women and men equally powerful beings, and also in the divine world there are male and female deities, and they need to work together. So in the Tower of the Gods I have a Bon deity. We'll see if he comes up today in the cards, and with his consort. Yes, okay. And there are 9 paths that you follow if you want to become a Bonpo. You don't do the 8-fold path of Buddhism, you do 9, right? And the 9 are, first you learn seership, that's step 1. Second, you learn to conquer negative energies in yourself and others. 3, you learn to transmute illusions, which is also symbol for conquering enemies, because the enemies are illusions. 4th, you study ontology. You learn the way of existence, what is real, what is. 5th, you follow the way of virtuous adherers, and you learn to practice the 10 virtues and the 10 perfections, which are slightly different to the Buddhist list. 6, you are open to practice the way of the great ascetics. So you've got to learn to fast and, do without too much heat and learn to conquer the body as a temporary vehicle, not to pander to it, and, learn to be an ascetic. The 7th path is the way of pure tantric sound. So it's what I was talking about. You tune into sound and you learn its magic. And you practice, spell magic, if you want. You also practice the way of sacred relationships because love, sex, commingling of energies is itself a practice for the Bon. They're not, they alternate between asceticism and sensualism, and the two go together. I think that's quite normal. That's what, human beings like to do. And if you do all that successfully, and it doesn't have to be done in that order, it's like a circle. If you manage to fire up all those engines, then you reach the supreme way of release into absolute truth and great perfection. That's what's on offer at the end. So bless them, I hope, I don't know, maybe they ought to open a Bon teaching station in Beijing and teach upper cadres of the Communist Party how to reach some of these places. And they might learn a bit of humility when it comes to Tibet, instead of thinking Chairman Mao's ideology or whatever the latest version of that is the only path to truth. I think this is the point about humility. Yes. Okay. So is that sufficient on the Bond?
Hi.
Yeah.
I just have one question about the first path. It's
Sure.
a word that I don't know.
Ah.
What does it mean?
Seership.
Yeah.
Ah. Okay. It's an English term for seeing deeply.
Okay.
Seer, as a seer, someone that can see, but it's not just seeing with normal eyes. It's seeing with the occult eyes, seeing with the inner vision, and seeing into the heart of someone, seeing what's really happening, and also seeing therefore into the karma of any given situation. So you know what seeds are at play, and so you can, you can tell if what might happen to somebody's future. So a seer is a term in English for people with those kind of occult abilities. And I don't know what the Dutch word would be. I can look it up in my Dutch dictionary.
Hi.
But I doubt it's got a term. It's only a little dictionary.
I'm scratching my head.
What is to see in Dutch?
Zien.
Zin. And isn't there a person that does that?
Een ziener. Maybe. Yeah. A ziener.
A zinner. It might be. That would be the most likely. Yeah, zin. Anyway, I'm still looking for a really good Dutch dictionary. That's on my list. Dutch English. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I want to say this week that I've discovered, I was doing the Frankish language, the origin of the Franks, and I was doing Dutch as a language for my 99 Names of Peace. And I've always wondered what happened to the Franks, who came to France and gave it the name. And I always wonder, well, where are the traces of old Frankish? Do they have any runes left or whatever? Well, there is a sword they found with Frankish runes on from about the 8th century. Anyway, it turns out Frankish was a form of Old Dutch. They were called the Salian Franks. The people that came into France and became the French were actually Dutch. And Old French and Old Dutch are the same language. So that's really interesting. So in France, if you want to know what the old ancestors of the Franks looked like, just go to Holland. It's so interesting. That's why I want my Dutch dictionary, to understand, it's one of those strange things.
I told my dad. He seems amused.
Good. Yeah, it is interesting. And it's not taught. It doesn't seem to be taught in schools, that. I've never heard nobody's told me that before. I've kind of worked it out.
I heard of that, yes, very recently, last week. I don't remember the source, but on a video on YouTube, and they were explaining that.
Excellent. Well, that's good. So the idea's out there.
Yeah.
And to me, it's about, this is good evidence for the European Union and pan-Europeanism, because the Dutch and the French, we're all interconnected. And the English, because the Dutch made the Glorious Revolution, and you know, the Dutch were embedded in, brought tulips to England and so on. And Alice Bailey's mentor ancestor was the ambassador from the English crown to Holland, believer in human rights like John Locke, you know. So a lot of the modern world was invented by the Dutch, not least New York. And also water taxis. Apparently in 17th century Holland, they already had taxis on the water, you know, boats you could get on. I know this from reading a very important book called Amsterdam, The Portrait of a City, which is a historical study of Amsterdam through all its eras. And it's the most liberal city in the world, in the best sense of the term. Freedom of thought, very important to Descartes and, you know, other Dutch-based people like Spinoza. So, anyway, that was a little afterthought. Yeah, enlightenment is ultimate purpose of seership is not to do party tricks. You get people at occult fairs that read your, you know, future and stuff. Those are sort of types of seers. But I think the highest form of seership is to find a path for us all to reach enlightenment, because that's the purpose of human life, I believe, both individually and collectively. And my job as a Druid is to find a path that all humanity can reach that collective enlightenment, and emphasising the best bits of everyone's achievements, you know. Like, no one's left out of the Enlightenment Party. The Russians and Ukrainians will just have to get on. The Tibetans and the Chinese will have to make up. The Muslims and the Jews will have to get on. The Palestinians and the Arabs and the people of Israel going to have to make up, you know, at the Enlightenment Party. And that's the kind of seership I'm trying to do, is to find a way for that to happen. I believe it's possible. I believe it's necessary, and I think I've mapped out metaphysically how that's possible. But anyway, so I send love and prayers to all those who haven't got there yet and haven't taken the right potions. I don't know what it is, what you can do for them. Haven't done the right drumming circles. Okay, let's stop there with the periodic table. Right, I'll put that to bed. And let's turn to the gods, because when in doubt, turn to the divine. This is what we say, because seers can only do so much. We have to then invoke the gods themselves. So have a shuffle and choose one and then pass it on. These are the tarot of the gods. It's the only tarot set you can buy that is for the balance for the goddess tarots. There are many different goddess tarots you can get. Okay, pass the rest of the pack on. Excellent. And I thought we should have one for the male deities, because they're important too. And we need both together. We'll reveal more at the end.
Yeah.
When we come to it, it'll be exciting. Right. Okay. Right. Noah, what have you got?
Two of fire. I'm not sure if it's spelled Marduk or Marduk.
Ah. Right. Marduk, I call him.
Okay.
The two of fire. Do you want to show us all what he looks like?
I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Their light was shining funny on it.
He's quite a useful god to have brought in here, but quite a strong one. He was really important in ancient Babylon and Mesopotamia. So the Middle East, I mean, we talked about the Middle East at the end of my talk there, and I've said before in these meetings that a lot of Jewish and Islamic language, thought, culture, religion, all come from Mesopotamia, and yet it's not taught in Jewish and Islamic schools, or Christian. And yet all the kind of, even the language of the Hebrew and the Islamic religion come from Mesopotamia. And Marduk was the saviour god to those people. He defeats evil. And he's a warrior god, but he's the top king of the gods. And he defeats the forces of evil in a titanic struggle using super weapons. So he's like Rama is to the Hindus, Marduk was to the Babylonians. And his story is really, really interesting. We know about it from texts they've discovered written in cuneiform. And his rise to fame as a god was connected with the rise of Babylon, which initially was just a city-state in itself, and then it became the capital of an empire. And so the statues of Marduk became really important. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar in the 12th century was a devotee of Marduk and other rulers of Babylon. And interestingly, when the Elamites briefly conquered Babylon, they captured the statue of Marduk and took it away with them to Susa, the capital of Elam. So that's kind of one way of really annoying your rival, is you pinch their god statue. But then the Babylonians got it back. The creation myth explains how Marduk came to power. There's a document, and there are 50 names Marduk has, embodying everything. The Anunnaki gods, that's the council of all the other gods, took counsel to find one god who could defeat the enemy gods. So there's a sort of war in heaven going on. And Marduk, who was then very young, volunteered. And they said, if you're successful, you can become head god. So they armed him with a bow and arrows, a mace, and lightning. They filled his body with flame, made a net which he could use to encircle Tiamat, who he's combating, who stood for the primordial chaos of the primordial slime, if you want, of life's original soup, and which is constantly trying to drag us back down into that condition. So he gathered the four winds so that no part of her could escape. And he created 7 new winds. And his biggest weapon was the rain flood. So, I mean, maybe the storm that just hit Florida, that's an example of Marduk having fun, according to the ancient Babylonians. And maybe it's a call to America to be more even-handed in its peacemaking between Israel and Palestine, because America's favouring one of the children of Mesopotamia against the others. And I don't think Marduk's very happy at that. Anyway, he was quite a heroic deity, and he defeated the evil gods, and after that was then enthroned as the chief god. So I think these traditions are interesting, and as a Jungian, I would kind of want to interpret them psychologically to some extent. I don't think there was a battle in which a god actually did all this stuff. I think human nature was doing what human nature does and having conflicts, and yes, there were battles. And to try and make sense of it all, the priests and the scribes generated a narrative that told this story, and the story was a teaching device to teach the young generation to be good, strong and heroic, and to stand against evil. It kind of functions in the same way as the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table did in Celtic or British society, or Roland did in France, medieval France, the Chanson de Roland, etc.